Today's DAF is a perfect example about the lack of clarity in certain terminology, because we're going to be discussing, there's so many clarifications that the Gemara makes over here in words that have multiple meanings in Eruvin. And we'll see, it's quite interesting, is that even the Chachamim who are discussing these issues themselves were not clear on the terms until they were clarified for them. So the first Gemara that we see today is a perfect example of that. We had seen yesterday the Mishnah. The Mishnah brings a machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel as to what you need to add to a mavoi in order to permit you to carry. Beis Shammai say you either need both a lechi and a korah, and Beis Hillel say you only need either a lechi or a korah. And we saw then the third opinion, which is Rabbi Eliezer, who says you need two lechis. So the Gemara now says, so kaman delo kechananya velo ketanakam. Our Mishnah goes neither like Chananya nor like the Tanakama. Now the Gemara is going back to a brisa that was cited on DAF Vav. And on DAF Vav, we had seen that there is a brisa that discusses what needs to be done to a mavoi. Now there the Gemara had clarified that we were talking about what kind of mavoi. There are two kinds of mavuos. There's what's called a mavoi mifolash, which means that it goes straight through, it's open on both ends. Both ends of the mavoi open up to a Rishus Harabim. And then you have a mavoi sasum, which is the more common mavoi that we discussed, which is a dead-end mavoi. And the Gemara there had quoted a brisa in the context of a mavoi mefulash, saying that because it opens up on both sides to Rishus Harabim, you can't just put a lechi or a korah there. One of the entrance ways has to either have, according to one opinion, has to have a tzuras ha-pesach, has a complete door frame, and the other opinion is that it has to have a door, a mamish door on it. And according to one opinion, it has to have two doors, a door on each entranceway. So the Gemara's question is, and again, this is a comedy of errors, the Gemara's assumption is that we're talking here about the same mavoi that we were talking about over there. And here, all you need is to put a lechi or a korah on the entranceway, and you're fine. What about the tzuras ha-pesach? What about the delis? It goes neither like the Tanakama nor like Chananya over there. So the Gemara says, Amar of Yehuda hachika Amar, hechsher mavoi sasum keitza. So let's redefine what we're talking about. We're not talking about a mavoi mefulash over here. We're talking about a mavoi sasum, a dead-end mavoi. And because it's enclosed on three sides, it's much easier to remedy the permissibility to carry inside the mavoi. And therefore, our Mishnah says, Beis Shammai omrim lechi v'kor, Beis Hillel omrim o lechi o kor. Beis Shammai say you need both a lechi and a korah, and Beis Hillel say you need either or. Beis Shammai omrim lechi v'korah. Remember the kasabri Beis Shammai arba mechitzos deoraisa. The Gemara makes another assumption over here that maybe that's going to be disproved. The Gemara says, look, why does Beis Shammai require both a lechi and a korah? It sounds like that what Beis Shammai is telling you to do is to do some kind of elaborate enclosure on the entranceway to the mavoi with both a lechi and a korah, because Beis Shammai hold that the only way that you can carry inside a mavoi to consider it a Rishus HaYachid is if it's enclosed on all four sides. So it sounds like that in order for something to be considered to be a Rishus HaYachid deoraisa, you need to have four walls. So the Gemara says, lo lizrok mishalosh hu demichayev, but letaltel adi ika arba. The Gemara says, no, it's not necessarily so. Really what Beis Shammai will tell you is as follows. Without putting anything on the entranceway of the mavoi, so you basically only have an enclosure from three sides, that's called a Rishus HaYachid midioraisa, such that if I were to take my red rubber ball and throw it from Rishus Harabim into that mavoi, I will have done a malacha. I have to bring a korban chatas for doing that. But still, it doesn't allow me rabbinically to carry, because the rabbis added an additional restriction, and they said, put a lechi and a korah on the entranceway to the mavoi to remind you that this is a separate domain. Now let's go to Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel omrim o lechi o korah. Beis Hillel say you can either do a lechi or a korah. So lema kasavri Beis Hillel shalosh mechitzos deoraisa. Let's say that Beis Hillel say that you need only three walls. The very fact that Beis Hillel do not require any elaborate fixture to the entranceway of the mavoi, which is basically they're just saying either a lechi or a korah, is sufficient. It sounds like their definition of a reshus hayachid is only 3 walls, because they don't require anything elaborate at the entrance to the mavoi, like Beis Shammai does. And the Gemara says, can we adduce that? So the Gemara says, lo, you cannot adduce that. Lizrok mishtayim hu demichayv l'taltal adi kashalosh. Because maybe in reality, I'll tell you, that even if you have a mavoi mefulash, which only has walls on 2 sides, because the 2 ends of it are completely open, maybe that, according to Beis Hillel, according to the Torah, is a reshus hayachid already, because it's bounded on 2 sides by walls. And maybe, if I were to throw a ball from a reshus harabim into a mavoi mefulash, I also will have done a malacha midioraisa. But the only thing is that they require you to put a lechi or a korah on when you have a dead end mavoi, even though that's for sure a reshus hayachid. But the rabbis only allow you to carry when you have a 3-way enclosure, a enclosure of 3 walls, plus just something minor on the 4th wall as a reminder. Yes, Bob?
It's almost implying that you could take the idea a little further, that if you had a house, let's say you had a house, the roof and everything, but you were missing a wall. You had 3 walls and a roof, and you sort of lived there.
Well, roofs are different. Roof changes the whole ball game. Okay. Sometimes you can be medama milsa milsa. Sometimes you can analogize in the way that you're suggesting, and the analogy is apt. But until you become really, really well versed in the laws of Eruvin, be careful about making such analogies, because many times they won't be transferable. Okay, so let's go on. Rabbi Eliezer Omer L'chayayin. Rabbi Eliezer says you need to have not 1 lechi, but you need to have 2 lechis, 1 on either side of the entrance. Iboyelahu. So now the question is, Rabbi Eliezer L'chayayin v'korah ka'omar, or Dilma L'chayayin below korah ka'omar. So the question is, when Rabbi Eliezer says you need 2 korahs, you need 2 lechis rather, is that 2 lechis with a korah, or is that 2 lechis just as a standalone? Now, if Rabbi Eliezer requires 2 lechis and a korah, he's basically requiring a tzuras HaPesach. He's requiring a doorway. So that's really the question. So Tashma Maisa Rabbi Eliezer Shahalach Eitzel Rabbi Yossi ben Preda Talmido Le'uvlin. So there's a story in the Brisa that Rabbi Eliezer went to visit his student Rabbi Yossi ben Preda in a town called Uvlin. Umitzah Sheyoshev b'mavoi she'en lo elo lechi echad. And he found him sitting in a mavoi that only had 1 lechi. So Amar lo b'ni aseh lechi acher. He said to him, my son, make another lechi for this entrance. Amar lo v'chilasosma anitzarech. He says, well, why do I need to seal off the entrance? Now that's a strange way of questioning why you have to add another lechi. And that's going to be the key phrase that we're going to try and use to prove our point. So Amar lei, so Rabbi Eliezer said back to him, Yisaseh muma b'chach. Just to seal it off. What's the big deal? In other words, do what I told you to do. Now that's the end of that story, but the Brisa continues, and it says something that's reminiscent of what we saw in the Mishnah. Amar Rav Shimon ben Gamliel lo nechluku Beis Shammai Beis Hillel al mavoi shehu pachos me'arba amos shein tzarech klum. Beis Shammai Beis Hillel both agree that when the entrance to the mavoi is narrower than 4 amos, you don't need to do anything. Al manechluku al rachav me'arba amos biad eser. The machlokus is only when the entrance is between 4 and 10 amos wide. Shebeis Shammai omrim lechi v'kor Beis Hillel omrim o lechi o korah. That's where Beis Shammai say you need both a lechi and a korah, and Beis Hillel say you need either or. But we're going to analyze that second part later on. But we're done now with the Brisa. Let's go back to what we're trying to prove from this Brisa. Ketani mihas v'chilasosma anitzarech. It says that the Talmud said back to Rabbi Eliezer, why do I need to seal off the entrance? The Gemara says, if you tell me that Rabbi Eliezer requires you to have 2 lechis and a korah, which is essentially a tzuras HaPesach, then I could understand why the student said to him, why do I need to seal it off? Because essentially, once you tell me you need a tzuras HaPesach, it's like you've created a mamish wall over there. And that's why the student said, why do I need to seal it off? But if you tell me that Rabbi Eliezer only requires 2 lechis, then why would the student consider that to be sealing off the entrance? That's not really sealing off the entrance. And the Gemara wants to therefore prove from this language that Rabbi Eliezer requires not only 2 lechis, but he requires a korah as well. The Gemara says, no. No, really what the student was merely saying is, why do I need to seal off this mavoi with 2 lechis unnecessarily if 1 lechi will suffice? So really, you can't prove anything from this language. Now we're going to go back to that second part of the brisa, which you'll see really contradicts our Mishnah. Amar Mar, Amar Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, Onechluku beishame beisil amavi shepachos me'arba amos en etzorach klum. That according to this brisa, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is saying that when the entranceway to the mavoi is narrower than 4 amos, you don't need to do anything to allow you to carry inside the mavoi. V'hanan tzna mishum Rabbi Shmuel Amar Talmidecha lifnei Rabbi Akiva. Lo nechluku beishame beisil amavi shepachos me'arba amos shehu niter o belechi o bekora. Our Mishnah had said not that way. Our Mishnah had said that Rabbi Yishmael had stated in the name of that he witnessed the students suggesting in front of Rabbi Akiva that when the entranceway is less than 4 amos, not that you don't need anything, but that both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that you need either a lechi or a korah, but you need to do something. The machlokas, according to our Mishnah, between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is only when it's between 4 and 10 wide. And there Beis Shammai say you need both, and Beis Hillel say you only need one of the two. But if it's less than 4 amos, everyone agrees, both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that you need either a lechi or a korah. How can Rabbi Shimon Gamliel and the Brisa say that you need nothing? That seems to contradict our Mishnah. So the Gemara says there's really no contradiction, because Amar Rav Ashi Hachik Amar Eino Sarach Lechi v'Korah Beis Shammai v'lo lechayayin k'Rebbi Eliezer ela o lechi o korah Beis Hillel. Basically, the way that you read our Brisa is as follows: you don't need to enter into a machlokes when you have an entranceway that's less than 4 amos. You can go according to the standard shita of Beis Hillel according to everybody, which is that you need either a lechi or a korah when it's less than 4 amos. So therefore, when the Brisa says that you don't need to do anything, you don't need to do anything which would be within the purview of machlokes. You only need to do that which everyone agrees upon, which is either a lechi or a korah. And therefore, the way that you interpret the Brisa this way, there really is no machlokes between the Brisa and our Mishnah. So now the Gemara asks a very interesting. So are you all with me here? Bottom line is that when the entranceway of the mavoi is less than 4 amos, you need to put either a lechi or a korah. But that's according to everybody, even Beis Shammai and Rabbi Eliezer, who say that you need to do more stuff, agree that when the entranceway is less than 4 amos, you only need to put either a lechi or a korah. So now the Gemara's question is v'kama. Okay, now we're asking about minimal measurements now. V'kama means how small can the entranceway be to still require you to put on either a lechi or a korah. And what we mean to say is as follows. Presumably, there's got to be a minimal shear that if the doorway is so narrow, then even a lechi and a korah you shouldn't have to put on. That's really the Gemara's assumption. So how small do you have to get before this is considered to be a completely closed-off wall and you don't need to put anything on? So the Gemara now says, Amar Rav Achli v'itema Rav Yechiel ad arba'a. If you have an aperture that's only 4 tfachim wide, or actually less than 4 tfachim, then you don't need to put anything on. Sure. Well, go on a diet. I mean, I'm saying 4 tfachim is about 16 inches wide. So you can fit into an aperture that's 16 inches. So you're going sideways.
That doesn't agree with what we just said, though.
What do you mean?
No, so we say less than 4. Oh, 4 ounces. Sorry.
Okay. All right. So Amar of Sheshes, Amar of Yirmiyah bar Abba, Amar Rav, Modim Chachamim l'Rebbi Eliezer b'Pasei Chatzer. Next discussion. And you see how these all relate to each other. What's the difference between a Chatzer and a Mavoi, Rabbosai? Who remembers? What's the difference between a Chatzer and a Mavoi? Who can tell me the difference?
In terms of what?
Physically the difference.
Oh, a mavoi is longer than it is wide.
A mavoi is longer than it is wide.
It also has houses.
And it has 2 courtyards and houses, and a courtyard is square, and you don't have to have other courtyards opening up into it, right? A courtyard is as long as it's enclosed, and we learned yesterday that if one of the walls is open, then as long as the breach is less than 10 amos, you still are considered to have 4 walls. But we saw certain provisions for that. According to what?
Depends where it is in the beginning, close to the opening or further down.
It opens to
No, it depends. It depends on if that 4th wall that's breached, does it have flanks or not? Are there remnants of wall on that side or not? Or is it completely open? Notice, do you have just 3 walls? If you just have 3 walls, then that's not kosher. That's not a kosher chutzner. But if you have a 4th wall with a breach in it, so then that's kosher. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was quoted as saying you have to have flanks of a wall on either side of the breach in order to be kosher. So comes along the Gemara and revisits that case and says that modim chachamim l'Rebbe Eliezer b'pasei chotzer. That even though the chachamim disagree with Rabbi Eliezer when it comes to a mavoi entrance, because Rabbi Eliezer says you need 2 lechis, but the chachamim agree to Rabbi Eliezer that when it comes to a chotzer, you need to have a flank of the wall on either side of the breach. And basically the analogy that the Gemara is making is that a breach in a chotzer wall is just like the entrance of a mavoi, right? But whereas a mavoi only needs a lechi on one side, in order to make this breach still make the chotzer a kosher place to carry, you need to have some kind of supplement on either side of the breach in order for it to be a kosher chotzer wall, in order to be a kosher chotzer. So therefore you see the Gemara's analogy is between the lechis of Rabbi Eliezer and the pasim, or those slats or flanks of wall, according in a chotzer. So now the Gemara says, the Rav Nachman Omer halacha ka Rabbi Eliezer b'pasei chotzer. And Rav Nachman says the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer when it comes to the flanks of a chotzer. The word halacha implies that there's a dispute here. Now, Omer Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak man modim Rebbe. Who are those chachamim who agree that for a chotzer you need to have flanks on either side? That refers to Rebbe, because Rebbe was the one who said that a chotzer's breached wall is not kosher until it's flanked on either side with wall remnants. So halacha michlal depligi, and the fact that Rav Nachman had said that the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer implies that there are those who disagree with that, and that, yes, that's true. Man polaga le rabbanan, and the chachamim do argue with Rebbe. Here's the brisa, the Tanya chatzer niteres bepas echad Rebbe omer bishnei pasin, that according to the chachamim you only need a flank of a wall on one side of the breach, meaning that if you have 3 full walls of a chatzer and a little part of the 4th wall, and the rest of the wall is breached all the way to the corner of the next wall, then according to the Chachamim, that's okay. Even though you don't have pasim, you don't have flanks of a wall on either side of the breach. It's only according to Rebbe that you need to have flanks on either side of the breach. Okay, so therefore you see that this is a machlokas. So now the Gemara says, Amar Rebbe Asi, Amar Rebbe Yochanan, Chaser Tzricha Shnei Pasim. It seems like Rabbi Yochanan is being quoted as saying, just like Rabbi had said, that you need to have flanks on either side of the breach for a chatzar to be kosher. So Amar le Rabbi Zecher le Rabbi Asi mi Amar Rabbi Yochanan hachi. Since when did Rabbi Yochanan say such a thing? V'ha'atu de amart mishmei de Rabbi Yochanan. Aren't you also quoted as quoting Rabbi Yochanan as saying that pasei chatzar tzrichin shi'ei bahen dalet, that the flank of a chatzar, in order to make the chatzar wall that has a breach kosher, the flank has to be 4 tfachim in length. Now, the question is like this, the chitema arba mikan ve'arba mikan, and maybe you'll argue that what that means is that, yes, Rabbi Yochanan says you need to have 2 flanks, and each flank has to be 4 tfachim in length, but that's impossible, because v'hatani, Rav Ada bar Avimi kamei de Rabbi Chanina v'amri lot kamei de Rabbi Chanina bar Papi, ketana be'eser u'gedola be'achasisrei. Now this goes back to what we learned yesterday. I want you to just try and remember the case yesterday where we talked about 2 chutzers that are connected to each other. One is the large chutzer and one is the small chutzer. Remember we talked about that case? The Brisa had said that you're allowed to carry in the large chutzer because when you're standing in the large chutzer and you're looking into the entranceway to the small chutzer, you see basically an open wall that has flanks on either side. So that's why you're allowed to carry in the large chutzner, because the large chutzner is a 4-walled chutzner, because you look at the wall that opens up into the small chutzner as basically a breach with flanks on either side. The only problem is you can't tell me that the flanks are 4 tfachim in length, which is what we're suggesting now. Why? Because we had clarified that the difference in dimensions between the large chutzner and the small chutzner is that the small chutzner was 10 by 10 and the large chutzner was 11 by 11. That only leaves 1 amos difference for the 2 flanks. So a half of an amma flank on this side and a half of an amma flank on this side. How much is a half an amma? It's only 3 tfachim. It's not 4 tfachim. So you can't tell me that according to Rabbi Yochanan you require a flank of 4 tfachim on 2 sides. The math won't work out according to this case that we just got through visiting. So the Gemara says, Kisalik Rabbi Zera Miyami, that when Rabbi Zera got back from the ocean, notice that the word Miami sounds like Miami. He came back. He came back from vacation, from the going down to the ocean, right? So when he got back, Pirsha, he had some time to bask in the sun and reflect upon this halacha, and he explained it as follows: that beruach echas be'arba'a mishtei ruchos mashu lakanu mashu lakan. So he said a fascinating reconciliation. He says that when, according to Reb Yochanan, you can either have 1 pas of 4 tfachim in length, or you can have 2 pasim, and each pas only has to be a mashu, only has to be a minimal amount of a flank. So you have your choice, according to Reb Yochanan. It's true what Reb Zera said, that you need to have 2 flanks according to Reb Yochanan, but that's only when neither flank is 4 tfachim. But if one of the flanks is 4 tfachim, you only need 1 flank. So now the Gemara says, "V'hadatzini Rav Ada bar Avimi Rebbehi, v'savrla keRebbi Yossi." And that statement, which said that the difference in measurement between the large chutzner and the small chutzner is 1 amma, is because that goes according to Rebbe, who says that who holds like Rebbi Yossi, who says that the pasim have to be 3 tfachim length, because Rabbi Yossi has a unique shita, which we saw very briefly before, that both a lechi and for a ma'or and a pas for a chatzer has to be 3 tfachim in length. But we don't hold that way. We hold that a lechi can be just a mashu, and therefore we hold also that a pas can be just a mashu. So basically you're seeing a whole variety of different opinions about pasim of a chatzer. One opinion is that the pas has to be 3 tfachim and it has to be on both sides. Another opinion is that no, it could either be 4 tfachim wide if it's on one side, or a mashu if it's on both sides. So now the Gemara says, Amar of Yosef, Amar of Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Chatzun iteres bepas echad. So again, you have another Amora, this time in Shmuel's being quoted as saying that all you need is 1 pas, flank on one side and not on both sides, in order for the chutzner to be permitted. So Amar le Abaye le Rav Yosef mi Amar Shmuel hachiva Amar le Shmuel le Rav Chananya bar Shila at lo tavid uvda ela ober of dof and obishnei pasim. But 1 second, how can you tell me that Shmuel says that 1 pas, 1 flank is sufficient? Wasn't Shmuel quoted as saying to his student Rav Chananya bar Shila that when you want to remedy a chutzner, make sure that you either have 2 flanks, or that the majority of that breached wall is covered with wall? So you see that you need to have 2 flanks, not 1 flank. So Amar lei va'ana lo yadana de uvda hava. So his response was, don't tell me that I'm mistaken about the permissibility of 1 flank. I know the following story that I know for sure happened, because it says that there was a place in Bedur de Ravasa, there was a place called Dur Ravasa, that Lashon Yam hanichnas lechatzer hava. There was basically it was a seafront property, and a person was living in a house where his backyard opened up to a body of water, and some of the water flowed into his courtyard. So obviously there was a breach in the wall, and through that breach flowed some water. The Asulakami de Rav Yehuda v'lo atzrachei ela pas echad. And they asked Rav Yehuda what to do, and he said, all you need to do to allow you to carry within that chutzner and to pull in to take some of that water, is to put up 1 pas on the chutzner. So you see that Rav Yehuda, who's quoting Shmuel, is correct that you only need 1 pas. So don't tell me that according to Shmuel you need 2 pasim. Amar lei, so he said back to him, that's not you can't bring a proof from that story. He says, because Lashon Yam kamart. Certain leniency that the rabbis made specifically for water. Now, why the rabbis made a remedy specifically for water, it's not clear from the Gemara. It could be just because water, the rabbis made additional kulas because they know that water is a basic necessity for people to access on Shabbos, and therefore they made a special leniency to be able to access water more than they would normally be lenient. So it could be that they only were lenient to only require one flank when it came to being able to get to access the water that flows into your chutzner. And how do I know that they're more lenient for water? Kidaba mine Rabbi Tavla meirav mechitza tluya mahu shetater bechurva. Amar lei ein mechitza tluya materes ela b'mayim because of kalu shekelu chachamim b'mayim. So the question that was raised to him was, this to the rabbi was, would it be possible, and you should have a diagram in front of you if you're using one of the illustrated Gemaras, but basically the issue is as follows. Let's say a person's house opens up to a body of water. Let's say you live in Venice, okay? And your house, you have a window in your house that opens up to a body of water right outside your window, and you want to be able to draw water out of the body of water on Shabbos. The problem is it's outside of your house, so it's a Rishus Harabim, or at least it's a Carmelis. So the question is, can I create an enclosure that's suspended above the body of water such that I can lower a bucket through that enclosure to enable me to be able to access the water on Shabbos? Now normally that would not work. A suspended enclosure that's above ground would normally not work to be considered to be a Rishus HaYachid. But the Chachamim made a special dispensation to allow me to access water on Shabbos, that even though it's a suspended enclosure, I'm still allowed to use that suspended enclosure. Sort of imagine to yourselves an upside-down box, okay? And the upside-down box has a hole at the top of it, and through that hole you would lower the rope which has the bucket attached to it, and then it would drop it through the box and then into the water, and then you draw water up through the box. And that would be permitted, but it's only permitted because of water, because the rabbis wanted you to enable you to access water on Shabbos. But under all other conditions, such a provision would not be permitted. Basically, what you see from this, we'll revisit this case later on, but basically what you see from this is that there's a special dispensation that the Chachamim were prepared to make to access water, which they were not prepared to make in any other case. So just because you see that one pas is sufficient for the chutzner with water flowing into it doesn't mean that it's going to be sufficient for all other cases. But the point is that the Gemara says, okay, fine, but mikol makom kasha. But still, you still have a contradiction in the statement because clearly, let's put that story to the side for a second. But you still have a problem because Shmuel is quoted as saying that you need two pasim from one student, and another student, Rav Yehuda, says that you need to only have one pas to make a chutzner kosher. So ki asu Rav Papa v'Rav Huna b'rei Rav Yoshua mi Rav Pirshua meruach echas me arba'a mishtei ruchos mashu lukan and mashu lukan. Same answer that we gave for Rabbi Yochanan. That what? That according to Shmuel, if you want to only make one pas, then that one pas has to be 4 tfachim long. And if you want to make a pas on either side of the breach, then it only has to be a mashu. It could be the smallest amount. Amar Rav Papa ikashali hakashali. So Rav Papa says, okay, fine, that I understand. But I still have a question. Why? The Amar le Shmuel Rav Chananya bar Shila ad lo tavid uvda ela ober rov dofen o bishnei pasim. That, remember, what did Shmuel say to his student? He said, when you want to permit you to carry inside the chutzner, make sure that what? That you either have 2 pasim, or the majority of the wall has to be enclosed with wall, so that there's more wall than breach. The problem that I have with that is, lama li rov dofen v'pasar ba'asagi. Why did Shmuel tell him that the majority of the wall has to be covered? If that 4th wall is breached, and as long as you have a pas that's 4 tfachim in length on one side, that should be sufficient. That's the problem that I have. Why did Shmuel say that the majority of the wall has to be covered with wall? So maybe you'll tell me that Shmuel was talking about a case where the chutzner was really tiny. It was only a 7 tefach by 7 tefach chutzner. And there was a breach in the 4th wall, and therefore Shmuel said you need to make sure that the majority of that open wall is covered with wall to make sure that it's a pas of 4 tfachim. Maybe that's what Shmuel was saying. And that would be the majority of the wall, because 4 is the majority of 7. So the Gemara says, but still I have a problem, because Lamali Arba Bishloshu Mashu Sagi, the Ha'amar of Achli Vitemer of Yechiel Ad Arba. But I still have a problem, because why would you need a pas of Arba in that case? When you have a 7 tefach by 7 tefach chutzner, remember we had quoted Rav Achli as saying that if you have an aperture to a mavoi that is narrower than 4 tfachim, you don't need to have any remedy done to that opening. So therefore, if the chutzner is only 7, if the chutzner's entrance is only 7 tfachim wide, and you need to minimize it, just minimize it to a little bit less than 4 tfachim, and you're covered. So if it's only 7 tfachim wide and you need to get it to a little bit less than 4 tfachim, then how much of a pas do you have to add? How much of a flank do you have to add? You only have to add a flank of just a little bit more than 3 tfachim. You don't need a full 4 tfachim flank. So no matter how you look at it, I have a problem. Why Shmuel told his student that the majority of that open side has to be covered with wall? I don't understand it. Either you should require a pas on either side, or you should require a pas of certainly less than 4 tfachim, just 3 and a little bit more than 3. So the Gemara says, so I can give you a number of answers. One answer could be, is that Rav Achli's halacha, that once you have an aperture that's narrower than 4 tfachim, you don't have to do anything. That only applies to a mavi, it doesn't apply to a chatzar. That's one answer. The Rav Achli gufa tanai. Another answer is that not everyone agrees with Rav Achli. Rav Achli was the one who said that once it's less than 4 tfachim wide, you don't have to do anything. But maybe Shmuel doesn't agree with that. Maybe Shmuel holds that even if it's narrower than 4 tfachim, you still have to remedy it, and you have to do something. So therefore Shmuel said that the majority of the wall has to be covered, of that breached side has to be covered with wall. Fine, Tana Rabbanan. Now let's go back to our case of the guy with seafront property or oceanfront or riverfront property, and he's got water flowing into his chutzner. Lashon yam hanichnas lechutzner ein memalin hemenu b'Shabbos. Right? Ela imkein yesh lo mechitza gavoa yutfach. So we had said previously that if you have a breach in your chutzner and water flows into your chutzner, then you're allowed to draw water from that, as long as you make pasim, as long as you make flanks for the chutzner. But over here the Bryce is saying is that if the breach is wider than 10 tfachim, so then you're not allowed to draw water, because pasim are not going to help with a breach that's wider than 10 amos. Unless what? Unless there is some kind of fencing or wall that is at least 10 tfachim high to fill in that breach. Now here we're talking about height. The height of that wall has to be at least 10 tfachim to make it a 4th enclosed wall. So, but that's only true when the breach is more than 10 amos. Then you have to make sure you have a low wall of at least 10 tvachim height. But if the breach is 10 amos or less, so then you don't need to remedy it. As long as you have flanks, then you're okay, and you're allowed to access the water. So the Gemara now, what?
10
tefachim is about 40 inches off the ground. So the Gemara now says, "Memalihu delo memaliinan hatil tulei mitaltalinan v'hanifritz achatzer b'milu alamakam da'asrla." So the Gemara's question is, let's make a diuk. Let's infer the language. The language of the Brisa is that if the breach is wider than 10, then as long as then you're not allowed to access the water. But it sounds like from the Brisa that the only prohibition is to access the water. But to carry in that chutzner would be permitted as long as you want to carry, let's say, a tricycle that's in the backyard. You could carry it from one side of the chutzner to the other. The only prohibition is to draw water that float into your chutzner. But why should that be permitted? If the chutzner has a breach of wider than 10 amos, then you can't carry it all in the chutzner. So why does the Brisa only prohibit accessing the water? It should prohibit any kind of carrying in the chutzner. So the Gemara answers, answers the Gemara that there really is a wall of 10 tfachim on the side where the breach is. But we're dealing with an elevated courtyard such that the water level rises above the 10 tfachim high wall. And basically it could be like it's like a dam, where you have a 10 tfachim high dam to seal off the ocean, the water from coming in. And what happens is that there's high waves, and the water flows over the sides of the 10 tfachim high wall. Really, I have a legally enclosed chutzner. But vis-a-vis the water, since the water goes above the 10 tfachim wall and covers it, it's not a wall vis-a-vis the water. It's a very interesting shita that needs to be analyzed further, which we don't have time for. But essentially, because as far as the water is concerned, this wall is invisible, but as far as other things that are inside the chutzner, that wall is existent, you're allowed to carry inside the chutzner, but you're not allowed to carry the water. That's the distinction that the Gemara is drawing. We've got to go weiter, unfortunately, because we're running out of time. Amar Rav Yehuda. Ma'avoy shelo nishtatfu bo hechsheru b'lechi. Rav Yehuda now says that if you have a mavoy where there was no shituf, meaning the owners, the people who are living within that mavoy, did not make an eruv. They didn't make an eruv. Now, how do you make an eruv? You have to incorporate the ownership of that mavoy by everyone sharing a box of matzah or a loaf of bread and saying that we're one corporate entity. But let's say they didn't do that, okay? Then hechshero b'lechi, and you went ahead and you put a lechi on that mavoy. Nevertheless, hazarik l'socho chayav. Even though they didn't incorporate the mavoy, still it's considered to be a reshus hayachid, and therefore, if you were to throw your ball from reshus harabim to the mavoy, you will have done a malacha. Hechshiro b'kora hazarik l'socho poter. If, however, you put a korah on the entrance to the mavoy, then that does not have the status of a reshus hayachid. Strangely enough, the Gemara is making a distinction between affixing a lechi or a korah. When you affix a lechi, the lechi seems to have this quality of being an added wall. And therefore, because it has the quality of an added wall, and now you have 4 walls, you now have a bona fide reshus hayachid, and therefore if you throw into it from a reshus harabim, you've done a malacha. When you add a korah, the korah does not create a wall. The korah only acts as a reminder, as a signpost, just to remind you that you're entering into a separate domain, to remind you that you're leaving the mavoi, going into reshus harabim, or vice versa. And therefore, since you don't have a bona fide reshus hayachid in this mavoi, because it's only 3 walls and not 4 walls, if you throw your ball into it from reshus harabim, you haven't done a malacha. So maskef la Rav Sheshes taima delo nishtatfu hanishtatfu bo afilo hechshiru bekora nami chayav v'chikikar zu asa reshus hayachid or reshus harabim. So the Gemara says, I don't understand, he says. Rav Sheshes says, I don't understand. You're telling me that because the owners of the mavoi did not make a corporate entity, then by putting up a korah, you haven't made this into a reshus hayachid. It sounds like what you're saying is that once they incorporate the mavoi, so then they've made it into reshus hayachid. So if you throw the ball, then you will be doing a malacha. So you mean to tell me that just because they incorporated the mavoi by sharing a loaf of bread, they've converted something into reshus hayachid? That's impossible. Midioraisa, something cannot be converted into reshus hayachid through the incorporation of a loaf of bread, because that's completely a rabbinic invention. And therefore, that's impossible to suggest that that's going to be the pivotal act that's going to train something from being not a reshus hayachid to becoming a reshus hayachid. And the Brisa specifically says that if you have a chutzner that's owned by multiple parties, or if you have a mavoi that's a dead-end mavoi, then it makes no difference whether they've made an eruv in the mavoi or the chutzner or not. If you throw into it, you've done a malacha. Because, so you see, therefore, even if it's only bounded on 3 sides, it's still considered to be a reshus hayachid. So, ela'i itmar hachi itmar. So, if anything was stated, it was stated as follows: Amar of Yehuda, mavoi shena roi l'shita hechsheru b'lechi. That rather, what we're talking about is not a dead-end mavoi. We're talking about a mavoi mefulash. We're talking about an open-ended mavoi from both sides, which cannot be rectified through just putting up a lechi. However, and that's what it means, she'ena roi l'shita. If you can't make an eruv in this mavoi until you actually add a real fixture of a tzuras hapesach or a delis on one end of the mavoi. So therefore, hichshiro b'lechi, if you put a lechi on one of the entrances to this mavoi mefulash, so you've created now 3 walls, because the lechi is considered to be like an invisible wall. So then, hazarik l'socho chayev. Therefore, if you throw a ball into it, it's like you throw a ball into an enclosure of 3 sides, and that's a reshus hayachid deoraisa, and therefore you've done a malacha. However, hichshiro b'kora hazarik l'socho pater. But if you throw a ball into it when you only remedied one side with a korah, so then it's still not. It's only got 2 walls, and therefore it's not a reshus hayachid. You haven't done the malacha. So alma kesaver lechi mishum mechitza v'korah mishum heker. You see from here that there's a fundamental difference between a lechi and a korah. Even though we're used to thinking of the two as being one and the same, that they both provide me the permissibility to carry in a mavoi, but the mechanism of a lechi and a korah are two different things. A lechi, which is the side post, creates an invisible wall. A korah does not create such an invisible wall, at least according to this opinion, but rather it's only just a reminder that I'm allowed to carry because I've done something to rectify this mavoi. And Rabbi holds the same way, but Rabbi disagrees. Rabbi says neither a lechi nor a korah by itself creates an invisible wall. In both cases, all you're doing is creating some kind of signpost, but it doesn't actually physically change the status of this from a two-sided mavoi to a three-sided mavoi. So, Eisei Rabbi Yaakov bar Abba l'Rava. So, Rabbi Yaakov challenges Rava because basically he's saying that neither a lechi or a korah creates this invisible mechitza. The Brisa says, Hazarik l'mavo yesh lechi chayav eno lechi potter. It says that if you throw into a mavoi from a reshus harabim, then if the mavoi entrance has a lechi, so then you're chayav because you throw into a reshus yachid. But if it doesn't have a lechi, then you're potter. So it sounds like the lechi is making the difference of adding a wall. The Gemara says, no. Hachi kamer, eno tzarech elo lechi, hazorik l'sochel chayiv, lechi v'dover acher, hazorik l'sochel potter. Rabbi says that's not the correct interpretation of the Brisa. You have to read it like this, that if you throw a ball from Reshus Harabim into a mavoi that only requires a lechi to rectify it for carrying, then that's a mavoi sasum, it's a three-walled mavoi, which is a Reshus Hayachid even without the lechi, and therefore, you're going to be chayiv by throwing in the ball. But if you throw a ball into a lechi which cannot be remedied simply by a lechi because it's a mavoi mufulash, it's open on both ends, so then since it doesn't have the status of a reshus hayachid, then even if you put a lechi on one side, you wouldn't be chayiv because the lechi is meaningless. A lechi doesn't change the status of it being only a two-sided mavoi. So Esvei, now let's ask from another brisa. Yeser al kain Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Mi sheyesh lo shnei batim b'shnei tzidei reshus harabim osa lechem mikan v'lechem mikan okora mikan v'kora mikan v'nosei v'nosein be'emtzi. Now, we had seen this brisa before. Rabbi Yehuda has a unique shita. He says that if a person has two houses on either side of Bathurst Street and he wants to be able to carry from one to the other, even though it's a reshus harabim between the houses, no problem. Just put a lechi on either door of both, of the doors of both houses, or a korah over both houses, and then you can carry from one house to the other via the reshus harabim. Amru lo ein ma'arvin reshus harabim bekach, and the Chachamim disagree, and they say that you can't traverse a reshus harabim under any circumstance just by putting up lechis and korahs. It doesn't work that way. Now the Chachamim only disagree with Rabbi Yehuda insofar as they feel that you cannot traverse, you cannot remedy a reshus harabim this way. But everyone agrees that putting up a lechi seems to be creating a new status of a new wall, because really these two houses are nothing, right? The two houses are nothing. By adding the lechi, you're creating two walls, right? So basically, the Chachamim agree that you're creating walls with these lechis. So the Gemara says no. Hasam kasava Rabbi Yehuda shtei mechitzos deoraisa. Really, Rabbi Yehuda holds that the houses themselves are the walls. The houses themselves form the walls. The lechi doesn't change the status. The lechi is, by putting up a lechi, you're not adding walls. By putting up a lechi, you're enabling me to carry within a reshus, what's already a reshus hayachid, because the two houses form two walls that midiraisa, according to Rabbi Yehuda, or now call it a reshus hayachid. And the Chachamim put the added requirement to put up a lechi on each wall, on each door of the two houses, in order to allow you to carry. But really, midiraisa, you already have a reshus hayachid since you've got a private domain on both sides of the reshus harabim. And basically, the Gemara is defending the position that Rava is taking, that a lechi does not create a mechitza, doesn't create a wall. It just is there for a heker, it's just there to add a sign. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Mavi Sha'archo Kerachba, and this will do this very quickly. If a mavui is as long as it is wide, which means it's square in shape, Eno Niter Belechi Mashu, then putting just the lechi is insufficient. Now, why is that? Because what did we say before, Mark? What did we say? We said that a mavoi, by definition, has to be longer than it is wide. And if it's, therefore, as wide as it is long, what is that called?
Chatzar.
It's called a chatzar. And a chatzar does not have the remedy of just a lechi. You need to have flanks. Amar Rav Chia bar Ashi, Amar Rav, Mavui sha'archo kerachbo eno niter b'kora tefach. And furthermore, Rav says, that if a mavui is as wide as it is long, which means it's square, then using a korah also of 1 tefach wide is not going to be sufficient. Again, it doesn't fit the criteria of a mavui. So Amar Rabbi Zera kama mechuvan in shmaita desabe kevin darcho kerachbo havalei chatzer v'chatzer in aniteres b'lechi v'korah ela b'pasar ba. Rabbi Zera says how wise or how precise are the teachings of our elders, in that what basically they're saying is that this is no longer a mavui, it's a chatzer. And in order for you to be permitted to carry in a chatzer where one side of the chatzer is completely open, is if you have a flank of 4 tfachim in length, is what we said before. So Amar Rabbi Zera ikashli hakashli. But the only question that I have is as follows: Lihavi hai lechi kepas mashu v'nishteri. But why? What's the difference between a lechi and a pas? Remember, we said that according to some opinions, even just having a pas on one side is permitted. So what's the difference between having a flank on one side and having a lechi? Just like a lechi can be of minuscule width, so to say the pas can also be of minuscule width. So ishtamitze hada amar Rabbi Asi amar Rabbi Yochanan pasei chatzah tzrichin sheva and arba. But Reb Zera forgot what was taught in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that in order to have a flank of only on one side, it needs to be 4 tfachim in length. Amar Rav Nachman aktinan ezehu mavoi shenitter belechi v'kora kol sha'archo yesel arachbo ubatim b'chatzeros pesuchim l'socham. That's exactly as Mark had said, that Rav Nachman says that our teaching is that the only time a mavui can be remedied by either putting a lechi or a korah at its entrance is if it's longer than it is wide, it's rectangular in shape, plus the mavui opens up to 2 courtyards, and each courtyard has 2 houses in it. And what is the definition of a courtyard? Which means that you need, if one side of the courtyard is open, you need to put a plank of 4 tfachim wide in order for it to be permitted to carry in that chatzer. That is, if it's square. So the Gemara now says, merubas in agula lo. 1 second says the Gemara, are you limiting it only to square courtyards? What if the courtyard is circular? You can never carry in a circular courtyard? So the Gemara says, no, hachi kamar, that's not what we're saying. We're just contrasting it to mavoi. I archa yesel rach b'havalei mavoi umavoi b'lechi v'korasagya v'ilo havalei chatzer. That if it's rectangular in shape, so then it's a mavoi, and there you can put a lechi and a korah. But if it's non-rectangular in shape because the depth or the length is the same as the width of the enclosed area, in which case it's square, so then it's judged as a chutzner. But that's not to say that a chutzner can't be circular. It's just that we're comparing it to a mavoi, and a mavoi is rectangular, so we're comparing a rectangle to a square. Now the Gemara's final question is v'kama. How much does the length have to be more than the width in order for it to be judged as a mavoi? So Savar Shmuel Amemar Adika Pishnayim Barachba. So Shmuel was originally of the thinking that it has to be twice as long as it is wide in order for it to be judged as a mavi. So on that, Amar Lei Rav, Hachi Amar Chavivi Afilu Mashu. So Rav says to him, I'm sorry, you're mistaken. My uncle Rabbi Chia told me that even if it's just slightly longer than it is wide, even by the smallest amount, it's now considered to be a mavi. And therefore you could use a lechi or a korah. Have a wonderful day.